Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, joining us from Manchester in the UK is Gert Brits. Hey, Gert. Welcome to the show.
How you doing? You
First
good?
of all, apologies for murdering your name. I'm not that good with foreign names, and basically for me, that's all names. So let me tell you a little bit about Gert. He came from a programming background and has worked across multiple industries, applying Agile coaching across diverse and non-tech areas, and finds that very interesting. He has a focus on group dynamics blended with systems thinking, and also the art of balancing application and theory. Gert, that was a short intro to you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Okay. So I come from a developer background way back when I lived in South Africa still. And I was working at a company called BCX, which did quite a lot of online suites and apps for other companies. And this was, I suppose you'd call it your traditional company. You'd be given a shopping list of things to do as a developer or tasks. So you wouldn't ever really be involved in the creative process or the thinking or the brainstorming of what the solution could actually look like. Before you just got a spec document or some of the things that we still use nowadays. And in this environment, I didn't get any exposure to customers. I only ever really felt like I was making my manager or my product owner happy. So it was a little bit demotivating. After some time, I was like, is this something I want to do when I'm 40? And I didn't really like the picture of being like, hey, I'm 40, I'm a programmer. I know I'd like not anything against the title. It was just something that in my experience, in my context, I wasn't being exposed to what good looks like. And the company consequently went and hired an Agile coach because they wanted to do changes. They wanted the teams to feel more involved and engaged in the company. And they heard that becoming Agile or having a more of an Agile way of doing things could help with that. So this Agile coach joined and he took one or two teams as Scrum teams as an experiment. And this is a bit of a fairy tale story that I was lucky enough to experience. Our customer, we met them on the first day when the team was formed, was very full of energy, very excited, very ambitious about what they wanted to achieve. We needed to develop an online roulette game where you'd have a video stream of the croupier while people were placing bets on the table using JavaScript and ActionScript and old technology to be able to move things around. And one of the requirements from the customer was that it needed to work on Internet Explorer 8 and older and use CSS, not CSS3. We needed to go over coaxial lines as well, because his clients that he was going to sell this to were in internet cafes in China, in India, in eastern parts of the world, where they didn't have the best technology. So we were specifically asked to use as old technology as possible to get this done. So we sat down and we had a bit of a brainstorming session. We had a bit of a solutioning session, and we came up with the idea that it would take us 3 months discovery just to see if we could do this or not. So we sat down and we started working on things, started trying prototypes. The Scrum Master took us through various exercises and activities, trying to troubleshoot and doing some testing first. We were testing over coax lines, seeing if we could even send and receive signals. And we were lucky enough that after 1.5 months, we actually had a prototype. It wasn't amazing, but it was working and you could actually see the video feed and it was in time with whatever was happening in the animations on the digital tabletop. So for me, this was a huge positive experience. It was completely different to whatever I'd experienced before. And I just saw and felt the change in the way of doing things. it was way more interesting. I was way more engaged. I felt like this is my thing that I want to get out live. The exposure to the customer, every single time we showed him something, he just had like this boost of energy, and that boost of energy just overflowed into the team. Obviously, we had some times where, oh, we couldn't do something, we need to change this, we can't actually give you that part of your requirement. So there were obviously parts where you could actually feel the sadness in the customer for not getting what they wanted. But because we had access, we could actually craft the next solution with them. So this was an incredible experience, and it completely changed the way I think about software development and how teams should work together. And because we were so successful, the company started advertising for Scrum Masters, and they couldn't find as many as they wanted. And when they were doing the interviews, they were struggling to place people. So I went and I spoke to this coach, and I said, "Hey, I'm interested in doing this. I think this is something I could do for a few years. What steps? What do I follow?" He suggested that if I went and did some training and spoke to him and to my manager about some kind of mentoring or coaching that he would give me on the job, we could give it 2 to 3 months, work on it, work with one of the teams, and then I could actually apply to become the Scrum Master that they were advertising for. So I followed that journey, and I managed to become a Scrum Master.
That is quite a story. And I really like how you introduce it with what you call the fairy tale story, because I think that's one of the things we don't often think about, is that knowing what good looks like, and of course experiencing it, right? It's incredibly important for us to then be able to replicate that in the future.
Exactly.
So for many Scrum Masters out there, I think that's definitely a great tip, is find a great team and just work with them. If you can't be there because they're not your team, for example, at least have lunch with them and ask questions, figure out what they're doing, because that's a great way to learn. And then, of course, later on, apply it yourself in your work. So, Gert, of course, the reason why we want to apply it is to succeed, but sometimes that's not always possible. So today's Monday here on the podcast, so we want to explore one of those failure stories. So tell us what happened over time, and then we'll dive into the details and the takeaways later. But tell us that story.
About when something failed when I was a Scrum Master. About 6 or 7 years ago, I was working in a team where we had quite a few Scrum Masters from junior, intermediate to senior level. And this is something that I've learned over time, and I'm being told this in my current position as well. I'm a very good listener. Some people joke that I'm like their therapist sometimes, because they can bring all their challenges to me. So people find it very easy to approach me. And this has just been a theme throughout my career. And I hadn't yet learned what to do with all of that information. So I was sitting amongst this team of about 10 people, and everyone was saying, "Oh, this person's doing that," and it frustrates me. And I was getting overwhelmed with all of this information. And I decided I'm going to do something about it. So I set up a meeting. I didn't call it a retrospective. I just said it's a team meeting, a team session. And I got everyone into the room, and I sat them all down, and I'm like,
and you mean the Scrum Masters, right? Like you got all the Scrum Masters into a room.
Yes. And I sat them all down, and I'm like, right, everyone, we have a lot of challenges. We have a lot of problems. I'm going to share them all, and we're going to sort it out. And I just shared everything. Everyone had told me, like, I used names. I was very specific. I wanted, like, when I was doing it, I remember in my brain that everyone needs to hear everything at the same time. And then we sorted out. So just put all the cards on the table, and whatever happens, happens. And we're going to get through this. We're going to work through this conflict. That's something that I've become very good at subsequently, working through conflict scenarios and getting to some kind of outcome. As you can imagine, this was quite a big explosion. Like, people were like, "What? Why are you talking about this? I only told you about it." So I betrayed their trust in doing this. And because of the fact that I did that with everyone at the same time, I felt nowadays it feels redeemable, and afterwards it felt redeemable because everyone exposed or shared everything. So it's not like it was one person being picked on or being bullied or anything like that. There was a lot of anger. A lot of people were seeing and hearing things for the first time because there wasn't a feedback culture going on. And I think because of this, a lot of people were like, "Oh, I didn't really realize that you felt like that about that. I can change that very easily. It's such a small thing. It doesn't mean anything." And I was very, very lucky that they didn't hate me after this. It was a very good learning experience because it did crash and burn. It didn't go all the way I expected it to go. And we eventually hired an external person to come and do a retrospective for us. And I learned about something called the white knight syndrome. It's a term we use when somebody feels compelled to rescue somebody else. And sometimes they sacrifice themselves or their own needs to do that. I learned about asking for permission when sharing things out of conversations, either in teams or in retros or one-on-one conversations. And I basically adopted the approach that everything is confidential. If there's something that I want to take out of this conversation, maybe take it to somewhere that we can actually solve one of these challenges, I ask the person or I ask the team, is this something that you're okay with me taking outside of this conversation? So the actionable things very much are having a retrospective and maybe having an external neutral person to run that retrospective for you, because I had a stake in what happened with that team. So I ran with my own agenda. Try and be very aware of what it is that you want out of the session and what others want out of the session. Maybe even make that a check-in question. When it comes to people confiding in you, be very, very, very careful with what is confidential. A lot of the time, once you've broken that trust, there's no way of going back. There's no way of repairing that.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how sometimes we think of the outcome, right? You wanted to have those issues fixed. And we forget that actually it's not the outcome per se that should drive our way of working as Scrum Masters. It's the relationships, the expectations. You talked about some expectations, like the expectation of privacy, right?
Yes.
Like that was one of the things.
Yes.
You also talked about what do we want to get out of it? Like you exposed a bunch of different anti-patterns that you had heard. But in fact, we might have benefited as a team a lot more from talking about one of those anti-patterns instead of all of those anti-patterns. And you also said something that I think is important. It comes from the expectation of privacy, but also from the motivation to externalize, which is this idea of getting permission before sharing something that you heard from someone. And the reason for that is not that it's not only privacy. So privacy is the obvious, but it's also maybe that person isn't ready to discuss that topic.
Exactly.
Right? Maybe it's something that they needed to vent with you, but they don't want to do anything about it because they're worried about something else, right? Like there's something else that is more important for them.
And now as an agile coach, when I talk to people, when I approach them or when they're approaching me, one of the first things I ask, probably in the second or third sentence, is what is it that you want from me? Or what is it that you expect from me? And it's not like a defensive or anything. And then I explain, do you want me just to listen and just hear this and hear you out and then go away with it? Do you want to brainstorm and come up with an idea? Do you want me to pick this up and run with you and solve it with you? So I call it different expressions of myself. Which version or which kind of energy or engagement or interaction are you looking for? And being explicit about that is very, very useful. And it's helped me actually answer things for people more easily and help them find their solutions more easily.
Absolutely. And I do want to emphasize that you talked about what kind of energy interaction you want from me. And actually, this is incredibly important because when people come to you, they're explicitly trusting you, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't come to you. But they are trusting you in their own way, right? Like we don't know what kind of trust are they placing on us. Exactly. Are they looking at us as a friendly shoulder? Are they looking at us as a partner to solve a problem? Are they looking at us as somebody who will take the problem away from them and solve it for them? Like we don't know. It can be any of those. And without, as you said, without discussing it explicitly, then we will very likely jump into the wrong conclusion.
That's definitely a possibility. And that's exactly what I did in that scenario. I believed that everyone wanted me to solve this for them. I didn't see or understand that It was just somebody that just needed a listening friend.
Absolutely. That was a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Gert.
It's a pleasure.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.